Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted to be joined by Owen McKendry. Owen, thank you for joining me. This is a reaction video to the news that it looks like Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn could quite possibly be finally fighting on September the 23rd. Owen, thank you for joining me. This, as things stand, this fight is not official, it's not signed and sealed, but it looks like for both fighters, this is kind of the front runner fight, and this fight generally has a good chance of happening now, despite what's happened over the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. What's your reaction to this fight looking likely now?
It's a fight I expected, to be fair. When it was sort of announced, obviously, that Eubank was going to initiate the rematch clause with Liam Smith, I thought there was no controversy at all. It was a pretty damning verdict from obviously getting stopped. So I thought that's probably not the right fight to take. This one, the way I look at it, it's probably the right fight to make for both fighters, to be honest. Conor Benn, no one knows what's happening with his career, where he's going, where he can even fight. There's so much hanging over him at the moment. It's a tough one. And for Eubank, he's at a bit of a crossroads now, really. Obviously, he still believes he can win a world title. Obviously, that definitely remains to be seen. So it's a bit of a crossroads in terms of, it could be what does Eubank do next? And it's very much where does Conor Benn's career go? Obviously, for different circumstances, but everyone's looking at it like there's no sort of overall verdict yet on who's licensing him, where he's allowed to fight, what organisations he can fight under. So it's a bit of a weird one, really. But I think it does good numbers. Like I say, it's got a grudge match in it. They obviously were supposed to fight. So I think, yeah, it makes sense, really.
Yeah, and just what are your thoughts on what's happened with both fighters the last few months? We've gone into detail about Conor Benn. Obviously, Conor Benn hasn't actually fought now since the beginning of last year. By the time this fight happens, it'll be over 18 months since he's last fought. I think that's a factor in terms of kind of who you're picking and how this fight could go out. He's not been active for one way or another. He's not been in the ring. And Chris Eubank obviously had that fight against Liam Smith, which he was the favourite in, and got stopped in the fourth round, which is an outcome not many people predicted. If this fight had happened last October, Owen, what would your prediction have been then? And what's your prediction at this stage for this fight now that it's happening 12 months later?
I'll be honest. I had a lot of people ask me when the fight was initially made, and I know the weight was obviously, it remained to be seen how Eubank made the weight and how he looked on the night. When the first fight when the fight got announced first time around, I was supremely confident Eubank Jr. shut out points victory. I thought Conor Benn would have come out firing. Benn's level of opposition hasn't been to what Eubank's fought. And Benn's had a couple of dodgy sort of decisions early in his career. I did sort of initially predict Benn to come out first 2-3 rounds and throw the absolute kitchen sink at Eubank, and Eubank to just sort of weather the storm, and then as the later rounds start to pick him off. However, now I'm really in two minds after Eubank posted that photograph on fight day when he was on the scales. He looked, I don't think I've ever seen a fighter look as drained. He looked brilliant in terms of, he was absolutely shredded, but you could just see in his face, it was almost like his body was too small for his head. So now it's a really tough one, because I think you've got to factor in Conor Benn hasn't been active at all. He hasn't really shown much of what he's doing in the gym. So whether he's sparring good level opposition, whether he's still dedicated, or if this hoo-ha, we'll call it, he is getting the better of him. So I think if it's dependent on weight, I think I'd have to lean towards Conor Benn at present, purely because it's going to be a similar weight to the 158, 159, and Eubank. He just looked like one decent body shot, and it just take it all out of him. So again, there's a lot of factors that come into play here, but I think I've sort of done a full reverse on my prediction.
Yeah, no, it's fair, mate. Look, a lot's happened, hasn't it, in the last 12 months? Eubank's lost. Eubank's, I think he's 30, could be 34 by the time this fight happens. Yes. We don't know what Eubank's training situation's going to be. Is he going to stick with Roy Jones? Is he going to do something else? There's a lot to unpack here. And I feel like Benn's activity, I feel like this fight, kind of what are both fights going to look like at 160, if that is the weight that the fight's going to happen at. There's a lot to unpack. Final question from me. If you are correct and Benn does win, do you think that's it for Eubank? That would be 2 losses on the spin, 1 to Liam Smith, one to Conor Benn. What do you think Eubank would? I hate using this word with you because I know it's your favorite word. I'm not using it on purpose, but yeah, would Chris Eubank Jr. retire if he is to lose to Conor Benn in September?
I think he's too stubborn. I think regardless, I genuinely think Eubank could lose to Conor Benn. He could lose to a prospect after. He could go to hell and back with a journeyman, and I think I don't know if it's just in his blood, but I just don't think he'd be able to give it up, sort of thing. Realistically, I mean, there's still probably good fights he can have, to be honest. He's at the level of, he's above gatekeeper level, I think, but he's not quite world champion level. So he's he's almost in purgatory in a sense, Eubank Jr. So there's still great fights he can have, but like you say, when you get in 34, 35, you cut in weight, it's draining, yeah. It's a bit like, could he get hurt very easily? If he loses to Benn, it's going to raise the questions as well of that's a serious grudge match. Obviously, what we've seen from back in the day with both their fathers. So personally, if I'm advising Eubank, it would be, what do you think you have left? If he comes back with, I want to be a world champion, I'd say give it up. Yeah. It's not going to happen. But if he wants to get in the ring, if he wants to still have those sort of domestic dust-ups, then see what he's got left in the tank. But to be honest, I think with as much of a grudge match as it is, unless he had a miraculous turnaround, there's not a lot to come back from if you lose to Conor Benn, if you're Chris Eubank Jr., to be quite honest. So I think a lot of it just depends on realistically what he thinks he's got left. But I know, like you say, you hate using it, but that big R word would be looming over him. And to be honest, it wouldn't be the worst decision.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Owen, thank you for joining me. Again, as things stand, this fight's not confirmed, but it's looking likely. If it is confirmed, we'll have many more things to discuss and unpack. But yeah, thank you for joining me, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Pleasure as always, mate.